Hi, everyone. So we'll get going in probably about a minute's time. Okay, so thank you for joining us today. We're going to be talking about how to use SharePoint for Business. Now, the reason this webinar came about was the fact that lots of people are using SharePoint, but they're struggling to get it right. They're finding it difficult. They can't find stuff, and they're thinking, well, is there a better way? If so, point me in that direction. So I thought, actually, that's a great topic for webinar, and no better person to join me than Ben, who leads our delivery team. Hi, Ben.
Hi, Rupert.
Hi. So, Ben, today I'm really thinking about people struggling with SharePoint or those who are going to start that SharePoint journey, and just say, like, actually give me a steer so I don't get make a complete mess of it. So, who are you really focusing on today, Ben? Who's the audience, and what's that audience going to get out of today?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. So absolutely, yes, this is targeted if you are a CIO or a business leader, perhaps an ops director, for instance, or an IT lead. You're about to start your journey to SharePoint and you want to make sure that you do it right. Or perhaps alternatively, you're already using SharePoint, but you're struggling, you don't find it's meeting your expectations. And the takeaways are going to be looking at some of the key issues that people encounter and how we can avoid them. And ultimately, we're going to run through what a good structure can look like and what that can do to set you up for success.
Excellent. Okay, well, that sounds great. I think the first thing to do is probably just, I know you have a few questions that you ask when you speak to clients saying, look, do you face any of these challenges? Because it's going to help really steer the direction, of a project. And I think that first flag, which we hear so often, is I'm struggling to find information. I can't, I'm spending far too much time trying to find the document rather than focusing the documents I'm working on. What causes that? Why did we get in that situation?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think in terms of causes for this, often it's because there's no clear structure. Perhaps metadata is being used inconsistently or not at all. And there is certainly an inconsistent approach to how documents are being filed. And ultimately, this is leading to wasted time, frustration, maybe constant interruptions as people are trying to ask someone else for guidance or help on how to get what they need.
Okay, interesting. I think what that then drives a lot of time is if you can't find it, people don't even know where to save it. And what do we do then? We save it on our desktop, don't we? Because we know that's safe. Um, do you see this a lot, Ben? What's driving that, or have I pretty much nailed it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the reason why people save it on their desktops is because they don't know where it should go, or perhaps they don't feel confident that the right people have got access to it, particularly if it might be a sensitive document. So they kind of revert back to what they know, which is at least if it's on my desktop, I know that I've got it. If I need it, and I know that no one else is going to be able to access it that may not be allowed to do so. But unfortunately, the impact is that that's going to lead to quite a lot of files being hidden from a team. There's a potential risk if that person leaves the organization, and inconsistency in terms of who's accessing or working on the right thing.
So really creating some silos there. I think there's another side of this, though, which we see particularly where people might have done, a migration from a file server into SharePoint, maybe, under pressure, that everything ends up in one document library. Now, from end user perspective, I know that can cause challenges with OneDrive, but what other issues are we facing with this, Ben, and what should we have done?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, in terms of the issues, as you say, potential performance issues with the OneDrive synchronization tool, you're weakening the impact of the search capability in SharePoint because you're not sort of creating focus, and you're ending up with perhaps a slightly more tricky or difficult to manage mechanism for managing permissions on the SharePoint library. And ultimately, as you say, this comes from having a mentality of thinking like a file share and not looking at how SharePoint is architected and how we can get the most out of it.
Okay, so yeah, you're replicating your file share, you're not getting the full value of SharePoint. And I think that's going to come out later in some of the demos that we got set up here. Now, when I do get into SharePoint, what I've often noticed is that each person who owns their site, or each department, they look very different. And I struggle with that because one half you want people to take ownership, but on the other half, I can't find stuff because I have to relearn a site every time. Is there a way we can get that balance right?
Yeah, so ultimately what we're looking to put in place here is some consistent standards for how our sites should be organized, whether it's in an intranet or a working space. What we really want to start using is some standard templates, so that people who use these sites will know that they're getting a consistent experience and not having to relearn every time they go to someone else's site.
And I think, on the balance of that, Teams made it very easy to create new sites or new teams. And suddenly I've got a marketing site, but I'm also have a webinar site. And I'm like, well, hold on, where does that go? There's some overlap there. There's been a lack of clarity, because people just like, I just need somewhere to save it, so we're going to create something.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I mean, I think, on the one hand, I think it's great that people in this case are starting to move into and use Teams and benefit from the capability. But the downside here is that is often this is due to a lack of governance around how teams are being set up. So, Teams will allow you to create more than one team with the same name. It might be that multiple people thought they were creating it, which is going to end up with documents being lost or a lot of confusion. Teams is a noisy experience. There's a lot of notifications and perhaps a lot of noise, and it makes it quite difficult to focus. And again, you could end up with sort of issues of files being duplicated, ultimately just making you less effective or less productive.
Okay. And then the final one is, this is certainly for people who've been using SharePoint for a while, is suddenly they're running out of storage, or the alerts come up in the admin center saying you have run out of storage, and now you're looking at $2,500 to buy an additional terabyte just for a year.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, it's something we're seeing more and more. And there's a few things here. One is sort of inefficient management of versions. I have a real life scenario, which is where there was a 10 megabyte high resolution investor presentation that had been collaborated on with 500 versions that ended up taking up half a terabyte of storage just for a single file. So version management is really key. Clearing up data that isn't needed, recognizing that not all data needs to go in SharePoint. So, using SharePoint to store, high resolution, or even raw format media files potentially isn't, it's not necessarily the right platform for that type of data.
Okay, so Ben, there's some of the challenges. Why don't we flip that? What are the goals? What does good look like when it gets to SharePoint?
Yeah, so let's start looking at some of these goals. So I think the first thing is looking at information confidence. Ultimately, what we're trying to do here is make people feel comfortable that they know where to save things and they know where to find their information. And when they do that, they're going to be working on a single version of the truth. They're not going to be working on duplicates. Everyone knows what they're working on. And ultimately, that means that that data is going to be accurate and help people make decisions or do what they need to do more efficiently.
So I guess that's one half of your story. The other half of balancing that is the security side, right?
Yeah, exactly. So on the other hand, we want to make sure that people have got the right access to what they need, and no one that shouldn't have access to something is able to get to it. So we can feel comfortable in the way that permissions are managed. We also, on top of that, want to ensure that we're meeting our obligations. If we have things like contracts or employee documents that need to be kept for a particular period of time, such as 7 years, we want to feel confident that that data is going to be kept and, more importantly, disposed of after that point if it shouldn't be kept any further. And then benefiting from some of the audit capability that we have within Microsoft 365 to be able to verify who is accessing what and when.
So with that in place, for me, maybe I just cover this one, is that makes me efficient. It means that I can find stuff. I don't need to interrupt people to find documents. If I suddenly have a panic on a Saturday and want to check something, I don't need to, start sending Teams messages and hoping somebody will respond, because I can find the stuff. But also it enables me to leverage, the wider benefit of SharePoint, which is the whole collaboration piece, and authoring, the way we can do version management. So really helping me be more efficient and bringing that value. But what's often advertising, this is why you need to move from a file server. And that sets us up for today, Ben. But what about the future?
Yeah, exactly. So, we're having lots of conversations with our clients who are telling us that they really want to start using some of the AI capabilities such as Microsoft Copilot, but they feel nervous about rolling it out because they don't feel that their data has addressed those issues and those goals are being met that we've already said. But once you feel confident that your data, is in place, you've got the right data and it's being secured, you can then start building on some of the capabilities such as AI-driven search, automation such as things like automated routing of documents based on certain criteria, and then helping you scale for the future as your business grows.
Okay, well, that looks great. I think time to bring it to life. Let's dive into our demo environment.
Sounds good.
Okay, so I'm driving, and you're going to tell me and show me around. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, so what we're going to do, Rupert, if that's okay. So I think the first thing is, and I'm just going to make my screen a little bit bigger. So the first thing here is what we're looking at is effectively our entry point into SharePoint. Effectively, what we're looking at is an intranet homepage, and this is going to be the springboard to all the other areas that we're going to be working on as we look through this webinar. So this is effectively your landing page, and from here we're going to be able to see publish news that might come from our comms team. We'll have access to key resources such as policies, information about benefits, etc. And then, of course, on the right-hand side, we can see all of the links to the third-party tools that we need to use. So I tell people that no one should have to remember or favorite a link for a third-party system that you use in order to get to it. It should be front and center, within the intranet. And I think something to point out is that those tools can be targeted based on the user role. So if you have a sales team, for example, they might be able to see tools such as your CRM system, maybe DocuSign or something, something like that. Whereas perhaps if you have a development team, they might have access to some developer tools such as GitHub or other types of tools such as that.
Got you.
So I think with that, so that's great. I think the next thing that we're going to have a look at is the navigation here. So if you hover over the navigation, I think the first thing that we just want to highlight is that our entry point is grouping a set of SharePoint sites into something called a hub. And in particular, we're looking at the intranet hub. And Rupert, if you just hover over on the hubs drop down a minute, slightly further on, we'll see that there's going to be a few different hubs focused on publishing and content, workspaces and collaboration, and projects and other areas that we'll look at a little bit later. But for the moment, we're going to look at the intranet hub.
Okay, so that's where we are right now. And as I understand it, a hub is a collection of SharePoint sites. Within those sites, we're going to have pages and documents.
Yeah, exactly. And so the other key things that you get when you group sites into a hub, you get three key things. The first is a common navigation experience, which we're just going to look at in a second. The next is a shared search scope, which means that when we're searching for documents, they're relevant to the context of what we're doing. And then the final thing is that all of the sites in the hub will have a consistent look and feel, which can be quite good to make it really visually clear, perhaps if you've got a hub that's more about external focused stakeholders, for example. But just to demonstrate this point around the consistent navigation and just addressing the points about consistency in general, what we're going to do is just hover over to our people site for a minute. So if you just don't mind doing that. And what we can see when that loads, give it a second. So what we can see here is our landing page for effectively our people resources portal. So where people might come to find out updates about things like employee feedback, maybe welcome new members of the team, links to specific people related tools, such as making medical requests or those types of things, and then being able to ask questions and have some contact with the HR or the people team. Now, if you wouldn't mind jumping over to the IT site a minute. So again, what we can see here is that we're using a consistent template. So the site feels the same, even though the content is different. So what that means as an end user, as I go from one place to another, I feel I'm not having to relearn. I can understand where to go to find things. And it's that consistent sort of polished, polished user experience. And as we click through the different sites, as we saw before, that navigation is staying the same as I go from one place to another. So I think what we're going to do now is just have a look at the search experience. So Rupert, maybe if you just jump back to the home page a minute, please. So we're going to search for benefits, which might be a sort of common topic that someone would look for. And in fact, we get some results there. But as Rupert's just clicked into the search results, what we can see here is that the results are coming back solely from the intranet hub. Now, what that means is that I'm not going to be seeing lots of search results from documents that might just have the keyword benefits embedded, perhaps in the context of a sales document or something like that. This has been scoped to content that is relevant based on what it is that I'm trying to do. So we have addressed the issues of search being relevant by grouping sites into hubs, so I know I'm only getting useful published content back and not all of the collaborative or filing stuff. So let's just go and click onto the employee benefits page.
Okay.
So again, what we can see here is a nicely sort of put together page that's making use of imagery and look and feel, and clearly signposting out some of the different benefits that are available. I'll be able to click through and access a bit further information and find out perhaps about the cycle to work scheme or what medical benefits we get, etc., etc. So it's nicely organized and sort of presented back to me so I can do what I need to do. But let's go into a fairly core area, or key area, in fact, which is the policies section. So again,
Okay, Ben.
oh, go
So I
over
see
it.
I'm in the policies area here, but I noticed that also I've got HR policies, but I've just come out the people area.
Yeah, so this is a good point. So our best practice, our recommendation here is that actually for things like policies and procedures, we recommend that you group all policies and procedures into a single policy space, because some users won't necessarily know, they don't necessarily want to go to people to see people policies or to IT to see IT policies, because actually there may be some policies that have a bit of joint ownership from one department to another. So by bringing everything into a central space, it means that those users will be able to go through and filter out and get what they need from a single place. If you could click into the HR policies link there, all we're really doing is just signposting or doing some pre-filtered searches. So ultimately, all of the documents live in this single container, but you can see we've pre-filtered them down to human resources policies. We could search for our documents, or we could do some further refinement based on keywords, for instance. So perhaps if you just go and do that, we're going to go and do a further refinement there.
So
And
it's like
again,
many online shopping sites, right? You do your search and you start drilling down to exactly what you're looking for.
exactly. And again, if you do a search term, you can further refine to narrow down what it is that you're looking for. And of course, the search is going to be able to read inside the document as well as just looking at, things like the titles.
Okay, that's cool.
So I think now that we've got our intranet with published content that we're comfortable, is the right content and people know, what they are able to get and search for the things that they want to do, we can now start to leverage some of the AI capability. So perhaps, Rupert, if you just go and click on the icon that's going to load our bot there. So what we're doing here is we are targeting our AI bot to our published policies, and in fact our published content with the intranet as a whole. Now you could use Copilot. We have our own offering if you're not investing in Copilot at this point, which is more targeted to publish resources in intranet and knowledge bases and policies. But as you can see, Rupert has used one of the pre-canned searches. We have a document back. We've got some follow-ups that we could do, or we could even just ask our own question ourselves.
Okay, and what I like about this, Ben, is it's not only summarized the answer, but it's given me a link back to the actual policy itself. So as we know of all policies, the devil is in the detail. So I'm going to go and be able to get that detail. But if there's like 20 documents, it's now boiled it down to the one I actually need to go and read. So that's really helpful.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, the key thing, people say, how can I make the most of AI? Because we know that our data is valid, we can now start asking questions, which is going to make it easier for that end user and make them more effective. They can just ask a question of a bot, get the response back, and they're not going to have to go around searching or navigating around to find things.
Okay, so this bot is working from a defined published data set. We're not looking at all the noise out there. And so we've got confidence in the answers we see here are based on approved information.
Exactly that. Exactly
Spot
that.
on. Okay, that's great.
So I think we've probably covered what we need to cover from the context of the intranet and published information, but now we need to start thinking about the day-to-day of where people work. So let's just jump over to our workspaces hub.
Perfect. Here we are.
So what we're looking at here is a central place where we're gathering all of the different workspaces that will be typically organized around business function, but also around other things like process or perhaps cross-functional working groups. And I think the main way to demonstrate that is just hovering over the navigation again. So similarly to the intranet, this is a separate hub and therefore has its own set of navigation. And what we have done in this case is lay out all of the different workspaces according to their high level department, as well as introducing things like cross-functional working groups, such as sustainability or perhaps something like cybersecurity or employee forum, for example. But one thing to call out is that we don't simply have to organize this based on your departments or based on your teams. We want to be looking at processes that might actually span across multiple teams and create spaces aligned to that. And probably the one to call out in this case is payroll, because in some organizations, perhaps smaller organizations, payroll might sit across a HR function and a finance function, but not with all members of those teams having access. So instead of simply saying, okay, well, this is in finance, and then we have some people from HR accessing it, we recognize it's a separate process and we create a space dedicated that has got the right people to be able to go and access it.
Okay,
I
that's
think one
interesting,
final,
Ben.
go on, sorry. Yeah.
I was going to say, let's dive into one of these and see what they look like.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just jump into the HR site.
Okay, this looks nice. Is this what SharePoint delivers out the box, Ben?
So no, it's not. So the SharePoint team site that you get by default is a little bit basic, if I'm honest, and I don't think it's necessarily the most effective from an end user perspective. There are some other templates, but I see them more as demos of what can be done as opposed to realistic practical examples. So what we've done is organize our workspace homepage to be a bit more effective based on the context of what you're doing. And I think the first thing I'm going to call out actually is our HR processes area that we've put on the right hand side. So in this scenario, we've got effectively an internal knowledge base that's just for the HR team, for them to be able to easily, share how it is that they're meant to work and be able to easily refer to that. So perhaps if you click onto one of those pages, we're using some SharePoint pages here to just, make it a little bit easier for people to understand what a particular process is and what they need to follow. And you can see we've got that navigation bar on the right-hand side that allows you to switch between different pages that are grouped by a high-level overarching process stage. So we think this is a really good, effective way of being able to manage internal sort of wiki or internal knowledge for a given team. I think the difference between this and the intranet is that this is very much internal facing to the HR team themselves, as opposed to content that might put on their people area.
So this is why this is not on a wider knowledge base, because only HR need to see this. No one else needs to worry about job posting. It's going to be noise to everybody else.
Exactly that. Exactly that. So I think we've talked about knowledge, but obviously the key thing about these workspaces in SharePoint ultimately is about documents. So on the navigation on the left-hand side, we've got two libraries that we've set up. One is our working documents area, and the other is our employee records. We're going to jump into the working documents first. This is what you would think of basically as your standard document library that you get within every SharePoint site. When we look at our folders, they're very much, it's a little bit messy. They're very much organized around the activities that we do. I might have a folder for a particular project I did. We might have a folder about, how we get improvements for onboarding, for example. So it's very collaborative. And actually, one of the key things we want to highlight, some of you will be aware already that there's a very close relationship between SharePoint and Teams. So we're going to demonstrate that now by jumping over to Microsoft Teams.
Okay.
And what we can see here is that the list of Teams channels for our HR team more or less aligns with the list of folders that we had in our SharePoint site. So we're now starting to think about collaboration and how we might have a conversation about a new potential candidate. We can have conversations and reply. We can share documents and interact and collaborate around that activity. If you click into the files area, or what is now the shared tab,
Okay.
we can see we've got that subfolder for recruitment for this candidate. If we click inside that, we'll be able to see their CV that they've received or they've sent us. So what we do is we're just going to show how that appears within the SharePoint side of things. Let's just jump back to our SharePoint site a minute.
So this
Click
is a
into our,
SharePoint site, Ben, which is linked to a Microsoft team. So whether I'm accessing it from a team or from SharePoint, I'm seeing the same content. Is that right?
exactly. So if you click into the recruitment folder and then into that subfolder, we're seeing the same content. So we don't have separate teams from our HR, our SharePoint sites. We're using both of them at the same time.
And I think you've got a rule here that you only attach a SharePoint site to a team when there's a conversation to be had.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, exactly. When there's collaboration that needs to be done around conversations or other things such as using Planner for task management, that's when you make it a team.
Okay. And then what about the other side of HR, which is like there's more formal documents, employee contracts, for example?
Yeah, exactly. So, the scenario here, we've got a candidate and we're thinking, okay, we want to bring them on into the organization. So we need to start capturing a folder structure to store their data. So let's go into our employee records area. So what we're looking at here is a set of folders that have metadata assigned. And so I'm a big fan of this functionality. They're called document sets. They are basically folders with metadata that make me get the best of both worlds. So I can see my folder structure, I can see the status of the candidate, start date, end date, etc. And Rupert, let's go and create a new document set for Bob.
Okay, so I'm going to go new, I'm going to go document set, and we're going to call it Bob S. He's not quite employed yet, so let's put him down as pre-employment, and let's have him starting in January.
Sounds good.
And will that do?
That'll do for the moment, I think. Yep.
Okay. Oh, look, he's appeared.
Yeah, so what we're going to see fairly shortly is once we click into that Bob S folder, we are going to see, might take a few seconds, maybe just hit refresh. Give one more chance. Okay, well, we'll come back to this. So maybe if you just jump into a different folder a minute, and then we'll just jump back and validate that that's there.
Okay, one last try. There we go.
There we go. Okay, so what we've had is a process behind the scenes that has just spun up a standard folder structure for every new employee that we have. So we're benefiting. People are comfortable with folders. Organized folder structures are not a bad thing. So we've got our organized folder structure, which has been set up as part of the document set. We're now going to go and create a contract for this person. So let's just go into the employee and job details area.
Okay.
Employment and job details, I should say. So now what we're going to do is create a contract for Bob. So we're going to do that from our new button. And we can see we've got a template already set up for employment contracts.
So that's a Word template stored in SharePoint. And I think what's interesting here, Ben, is I'm starting from SharePoint where the document is going to be saved, rather than the other way, which is I start in Word and then think about where I'm going to save it afterwards.
Yeah, exactly. So we're just going to save that. You don't have to use the online version of Word to do this. This works just as well for using the desktop version too. So Rupert saved that. Let's just jump back into our library.
Okay, there it is.
So one of the key things I want to point out with this is that we have already set some metadata on this document. We have set the document type. Now, At no point have we had to go and fill in any metadata tags and tag documents manually. By choosing the contract template, we have automatically got the document type set. And we can also see that the status has inherited from what we set when we created the document set in the first place. So that's great. We're talking about metadata a lot, but why do we care about metadata? Why is that useful to us? So I think what we're going to do now is demonstrate why metadata can be really powerful. So if we
Okay.
go up to our employee records root folder there. So let's imagine a scenario where you need to, you're a HR team member, and you need to get an overview of all of the current employment contracts for all of your active employees. And you don't want to have to go through every single subfolder and go and search around to dig that contract out. So now that we have metadata set on our contracts, I can then use a SharePoint view and then switch over to my current employee contracts view, which is over on the right hand side. So current employment contracts. And what we've done is pull out all of the documents that are tagged with contract and hidden the folder structure. So suddenly I can very quickly see at a glance all of the contracts based on their start date being active, and I can see, you know, that that's come back to me very quickly without having to go and work my way through lots of different folders to go and dig out each one, which can take a bit more time. So again, I'm making myself much more efficient by being able to get what I need. And another scenario could be, for instance, that you want to see a summary of all upcoming or due to expire right to work documentation, for example.
Got you. Perfect, Ben. That's
Okay.
really helpful.
So I think we are probably there as far as the sort of workspace is concerned. There is just one last thing I do want to show though, which is, you know, how do we ensure that these documents, which are effectively records, are going to be kept for the right period of time? So what we're going to do now is just select that contract that's been created and go into our details pane, and then have a little scroll down. And what we're going to see, we're just going to go past this metadata a minute. And we can see that a HR records label has been applied. So if we just click on that a moment, Rupert, what we'll see there in the screen is that it's telling us that anything with a HR record label applied is going to be kept for 7 years. Okay, so we've set that as a default on that library. So we are ensuring documents are being kept appropriately without just applying a sort of blanket one-size-fits-all retention policy on everything.
Got you.
So
Really helpful. I think
what
the
might
flip
just
side of that,
go on, yeah.
Ben, is if I'm advertising a role, I've got 20 CVs, and can I make sure that I'm not holding on to those longer than I actually need to? Because obviously that's a liability if I'm holding that personal information.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's a really good point. So on the one hand, people on the whole are actually quite good at retaining data, but we're less good at disposing data at the right time. So yes, how do we deal with that? So in the scenario of CVs, we can create a label and apply it to our recruitment folder, for instance, that says dispose of everything within here within 6 months. And if we do bring a candidate on, then we can go and apply their keep for 7 years, or keep until they leave label instead. But it means that we don't have to worry about old CVs clogging up that may or may not have a liability on us for some reason.
Great. Perfect. Okay, so let's move on to the next hub, Ben. I know, a lot. Let's think about when we're working with clients. Often it might be project based or it might be client based. What's a good way of managing that?
Yeah, exactly. So I think it's time to move into our projects hub.
There we go.
Good stuff. So what we can see here is effectively a central place where we're going to manage all projects. Effectively a project which isn't necessarily aligned to a specific team. It might have people from all across the organization. And in this scenario, for instance, it might be projects that are created off the back of perhaps a tendering process that you've gone through. So you might spin up a project to represent a bid, you then win that project, and then you're going to deliver it. Or of course, it could be used for internal organization projects as well. So we can see our list of projects, we can see things like the status, and what we're going to do is click inside one of those projects and we'll see that they have a standard workspace that is going to be set up similarly to our team workspace. Similarly to before, we have a working documents area for collaboration. It's connected to Microsoft Teams for some of that wider collaboration capability. And we have an area, a document library, where we're going to store our project records, for any key documents, such as a project initiation document or something like that. But then on top of that, we're introducing SharePoint or Microsoft lists to do things such as manage issues, manage our risk register, all of that kind of project RAID log type activity. Now, all of this has been standardized as part of our template. So as we create a new project, maybe it's someone in a PMO that might do that. They'll spin up the project workspace. The right people can come in and have access to it, and it's working in a consistent way.
Okay, I know from the projects we've done in the past, Microsoft doesn't really do site templates, so this is something that we've needed to automate. But I think the nice part about that is you can put controls on it, so only certain people can create these. Maybe it's your head of PMO can create it, which stops that sprawl. So one of those challenges we talked about right at the top of the session. So yeah, interesting.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So I think the final thing we're going to look at, so that's projects. The final scenario we're going to have a look at now is the committees hub.
Okay.
So if we just perhaps swap over to that. So just, this isn't necessarily something that's applicable for all organizations, but we see this quite a lot for, in things like charities or member-based organizations, or organizations that reach a certain size that have, much more, governance, a governance put into place around how certain decisions are made. So the idea with the committees hub is that it manages spaces where things like meeting minutes, agendas, any support material around a committee meeting can be presented. And what we're going to do, and we can see the upcoming committee meetings that are going to take place. And what we're going to do is just jump into one of those committee workspaces that are set up.
Okay.
So let's go into our finance and audit committee. Yep. Again, we have a standard template here. Typical behaviors of how a committee is going to be run is that there will be a core group of people that will prepare and manage the documents to then present and make available to the committee members. So we have our working documents area for that collaborative exercise. And then we've got our slightly more formally managed committee meetings library itself. So perhaps let's just jump into that.
Okay.
Okay, and then we're just going to go into that subfolder there, and we can see that the committee meetings are organized by the committee date. Now we're using that sort of reverse date, year then month. It makes it easier to sort, and we can see we've got the minutes, we've got the agenda, etc. There might be any additional material. Now the key thing really that we want to demonstrate here is that often the behavior of a committee is that there might be people that are technically not employees of the organization. It could be things like non-executive directors. It could be, external stakeholders that might be a member of the committee, and you want to be able to share documents to committee members so that they can read them prior to the meeting. So in this scenario, what we're going to do, perhaps if we just jump up a level, Rupert, if you don't mind. What
Sure.
we're going to be able to do is click on the share button and share that, or we don't necessarily need to click on that now, but you're going to share that meeting to someone, and you can then choose what type of permissions they're going to have. You can share externally. You can choose if they've got read or write access. You don't necessarily need to worry about having them access to a Microsoft team or anything like that. You're just creating a nice and easy way for them to be able to get those documents, sign in and validate who they are, and then be able to read those documents prior to that committee meeting.
Helpful. And I think the nice thing about this is if you've got maybe external trustees, they don't need a Microsoft license, right? Then you can just share it with them. You can still put your MFA and security controls in place, but we can share it without having that license issue.
Exactly that. Exactly that.
Okay. Look, that was a really good whiz round SharePoint, Ben. Let's look at, I guess, the key learnings or takeaways from that section. So I think we might just flip back to the deck there. So first thing you talked about, Ben, really was those 3 types of content. So you've talked about, look, we started with publishing. So that's the whole intranet piece. Is like, this is where I go to get trusted and approved information. And then what I noticed you did, you set up separate hubs for the collaboration and filing side of it. So it's really clear, this is where I get work done. this is where I find out information around the organization. Is there anything I'm missing there?
No, not at all. Yeah, absolutely. So it's publishing is key, and then it's what is filing, what is collaborative, and we're representing. I think probably the key thing is that we tend to say keep your publishing hub separate from your collaboration and filing hubs.
Okay. And so that leads us nicely onto the hubs concept itself. So you highlighted there that the hubs that we created focused, certain needs, and those hubs were around workspaces, projects, the publishing area intranet. You created separate around committees, which brings that search to that hub, brings that common navigation, that common look and feel. So real value in hubs there and collecting that. And I think often we see hubs maybe implemented not in a best practice kind of way, and people just say, well, we've grouped everything by department, where really you should be thinking about the audience. I think that's a fair takeaway, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah, exactly. You will see a lot of people going, "Oh, I'm going to create a department focus hub," and that I don't think that really gets you the most sort of effective benefit.
Okay. And so let's talk about those workspace itself, Ben. And I think, one of the things that you've talked about was those two key types of document libraries, but also, how we set up those templates as well.
Yeah, those workspaces. So exactly. So I mean, a key thing really is understanding what the processes are and recognizing when a process needs people from multiple parts of an organization. So we create a workspace aligned to the process as opposed to the default behavior of simply creating a workspace for each function. You will almost definitely have workspaces for those functions, but recognizing when you need to be a bit more nuanced than that.
Okay, so there's additional workspaces, like we said, payroll, where you've got multiple teams coming together, helping to keep security simple. And then, yeah, we talked about the purpose of documents. So you talked about we started in our working documents. It's a bit unstructured, but it's where things like trackers and active documents live. And then we have that formal area for filing/records where we're using more metadata so we can find it again. We might be looking at things like labels to protect information as well. And so we've got that more, that structured view. And I'm guessing it's that kind of thing what you want to reference in the future.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the area that you're going to start pointing your AI tools at, for instance, your filing and records area and your published content.
That's smart. Okay, so we're separating our information out so it's AI ready. Okay, Ben. Well, look, we've covered an awful lot. There was an awful lot more we wanted to cover today. And we've got a download ready to go alongside this. So if you're watching in YouTube, you should be able to see and go down to the description. You'll be able to download this deck with the additional content and slides that we weren't able to cover today. So do go and get that. It takes you to our website. There's no sign-up forms, no email address required. You can just go and grab it. We like to share. But if this has triggered some thoughts or you're looking for some help, then let's talk about the journey. And so the first about the journey really is if you're thinking about, well, let's scrap about all the issues of SharePoint. Let's talk about the vision. What do you want to achieve? And when we've created that vision, what's the strategy of executing that vision? So the way we do that is through a couple of workshops. And now that first workshop is all about fact finding, art of the possible, trying to bring everyone to the same level in the organization of their understanding of SharePoint, but also where you want to take it to, what you're going to use it for, but also what you're not going to use it for as well. You may well have Microsoft Dynamics and that will have its role. The second workshop we deliver is about the scoping and the strategy. It's like, well, we talked about 10 things in workshop one, but let's really drill into the two things which are most important to your organization right now. And the first, and the things we really want to understand is what are the deliverables? Who's going to do it? How much time do I need to invest? What does that look like onto a Gantt chart? And also, most importantly, I guess for many organizations, what's it going to cost? What's the investment? So that's really what that workshop two is about. And so if this is, something that you want to look into, best way to do that is jump on our website and click on the link and you can book a meeting with myself. And in that meeting, we can cover, we can cover wider points about SharePoint. If you've got particular challenges, happy to dive in that as well, but always open for that conversation. So hope you found this useful. Always enjoy spending time with Ben explaining, what his thinking about how we go approach things, the architecture of SharePoint, and basically how it works for people at the end of the day. But Ben, really, thank you for your help again today. Really insightful, and look forward to doing another one soon.
Yep, thanks a lot.
Okay, cheers, everyone. Goodbye.